Welcome to the channel. Here we dive into the past so that you may fall asleep easily and with benefit. Do not forget to subscribe and to put a like. By the end of this lecture, you will be sleeping deeply. Close your eyes. The story begins. Today, we will travel into the world of historical mysteries, answers to which do not exist even now. Many of them have become the basis for conspiracy theories. But, as they say, there is no smoke without fire. At the heart of each mystery lie real facts and findings. We will try to understand where is truth and where is invention. And we will begin with the story of the planet Nibiru. Almost 5,000 years ago, in the fertile valley between the Tigris and the Euphrates, on the territory of present-day Iraq, in the area which the ancient Greeks called Mesopotamia, a civilization arose that gave the world writing, architecture, urban life, laws, and astronomy. This was the Sumerian civilization, one of the earliest highly organized societies. The Sumerians built the first cities: Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Eridu, Nippur. Each of them was an independent state with its own laws, army, markets, and of course, a temple. The temple, or Igal, the House of the Great One, was not only a religious center. Here, archives were kept, scribes were trained, observations of nature and the sky were carried out. It was a scientific, judicial, and educational center. The priests watched over order on earth and over the movement of the heavenly bodies. Everything happening, from harvest to war, was considered a reflection of the will of the gods manifested through stars, planets, and the moon. To this day, tens of thousands of clay tablets with cuneiform have survived. Among them are economic records, court decisions, epics, medical recipes, and astronomical tables. Of special importance are texts from the library of Ashurbanipal, king of Assyria, in the capital Nineveh. This library was excavated in 1849 by the archaeologist Austen Henry Layard. Today, its tablets are kept in the British Museum. Among them, the double tablet Mul Apen stands out in particular. It is dated to the 6th century before our era, but in it are gathered observations lasting more than 700 years. This is not a myth, but a true scientific catalogue. It describes the movement of the sun, the moon, the planets, seasonal stars, and even gives advice for agriculture. In essence, it is the first star encyclopedia of humankind. The Sumerians and Babylonians knew 5 planets that can be seen with the naked eye: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. They were called wandering stars. Each planet was linked with a god: Venus with Ishtar, Mars with Nergal, Jupiter with Marduk. All the movements of the planets were recorded, and on their basis, predictions were built, both astronomical and astrological. And in these texts, there appears a special word: Nibiru. In the Akkadian language, Nabiru means crossing, passage, transition. In some cases, Nibiru meant a point in the sky, in others, a particular star. In the myth Enuma Elish, it is said, Marduk set Nibiru as the star by which the gods go. It watches over the paths of the heavenly bodies so that they do not go astray. In other texts, Nibiru is associated with Jupiter, especially when it stands high above the horizon. In tablet number 6174, it is said that the appearance of Nibiru is linked with changes. Some scholars think that Nibiru is not a planet, but a heavenly reference point, a marker for the movement of the luminaries, part of a coordinate system rather than an independent body. And what is important, in no Sumerian or Babylonian text is Nibiru described as a planet with an orbit beyond the solar system. The ancients simply had no such idea, but in the 20th century, The word Nibiru received a new meaning. In 1976, the writer Zecharia Sitchin published the book The 12th Planet. In it, he claimed that he had deciphered Sumerian tablets and had found a mention of a planet which supposedly appears in the solar system once every 3,600 years. Moreover, according to him, on this planet lived the Anunnaki, powerful visitors from the sky who allegedly created humankind. He claimed that the Sumerians knew not only about 9 planets, but about 12 heavenly bodies, including the sun and the moon. As confirmation, he cited images allegedly reflecting the solar system on ancient tablets, but not one of these arguments stands up to scientific scrutiny. Tablet VA 243, to which he referred, does not depict planets at all. It is merely a geometric motif. His translations differ from academic versions, and many statements are based only on guesswork. Assyriologists, philologists, and archaeologists, among them William Hale, Robert Simpson, and Michael Heiser, analyzed Sitchin's works in detail and concluded, this is not history, not linguistics, and not archaeology. It is pseudoscience. Nevertheless, his books gained popularity. The idea of the planet Nibiru entered mass culture and at the beginning of the 2000s began to spread actively on the internet. On the eve of 2012, the myth surfaced again, combined with incorrect interpretations of the Maya calendar. This produced a wave of anxiety. Nibiru was dubbed the planet of apocalypse. The story became so loud that NASA issued an official refutation. Not one planet with such parameters is recorded, observed, or simply exists. Yet almost simultaneously, another hypothesis appeared in real astronomy. In 2016, scientists Michael Brown and Konstantin Batygin published mathematical calculations suggesting the existence of a massive 9th planet beyond the orbit of Neptune. It has not yet been observed directly, but anomalies in the motion of trans-Neptunian objects hint at its presence. This hypothetical planet received the provisional name Planet N, and despite the outward coincidence, it has nothing to do with Nibiru. Thus, we find ourselves facing 2 realities. The first, scientific, archaeological finds, texts, observations, and historical context. The second, cultural, myths, fantasies, popular versions without evidence. But the important thing is this: the Sumerians really did study the stars attentively and precisely. They searched the sky for patterns, rhythms, and signs. Their observations laid the foundation of future astronomy. And even though Nibiru was never a planet, its name became a symbol of humanity's urge toward mystery and the desire to explain the unknown. Perhaps that is why, even after thousands of years, we continue to ask, what did the Sumerians actually see in the night sky? We have just spoken about Nibiru, a celestial image turned into a symbol of the thirst for answers. But mysteries are not only in the stars, sometimes they hide right underfoot, in the snow, among mountains and silent trees. Mysteries where everything is too real to be fiction and too illogical to yield to explanation. One of such stories happened in 1959 in the northern Urals. A group of 9 hikers set out on a trek and did not return. Their tent was found cut open. Several bodies lay without clothing, with strange injuries. Traces of radiation were discovered on the belongings. The investigation lasted 3 months. The final verdict: an irresistible force. And then, decades of silence. This is a story where almost everything is officially documented, but almost nothing is explained. let us find out who these people were, what happened to them, and why, even after more than 60 years, Dyatlov Pass remains one of the most mysterious pages of the 20th century. The members of that group were not random tourists. They were trained, experienced people who had completed many treks. All of them studied at the Ural Polytechnic Institute. They were from 20 to 27 years old. Almost all had an engineering cast of mind, could work with maps and routes, and knew safety techniques. The group was led by Igor Dyatlov, a fifth-year student, a radio engineer, a calm and reliable leader by character. He developed radio receivers, designed ski routes, and could organize discipline even in harsh conditions. Along with him went his friends, Georgy Krivonischenko, Yuri Doroshenko, Nikolai Thibaut Brignoles, Zinaida Kolmogorova. All of them had solid hiking experience and the right to undertake routes of the highest category of difficulty. In the group, there was also Lyudmila Dubinina, one of the few young women taking part in winter treks. She was 21 years old. She already had experience on a route where a person had died and knew how to act in critical situations. Among the participants, there was also one of the older members, Semyon Zolotaryov. He joined at the last moment, already at the age of 37 years. He had a combat past and service experience. He taught at the Dozaf school and knew well how to act in difficult conditions. His personality still remains one of the most mysterious in this story. Altogether, they formed a coordinated team in which each person understood his or her role. These were not beginners. This was a trained, physically resilient group with a plan, experience, and a route. And precisely for that reason, everything that happened next remains even more incomprehensible. The trek began on the 27th of January, 1959. The group was last seen in the settlement of Vijay. Sending a telegram from there, they moved toward Mount Otorten. On the 1st of February, the hikers pitched their camp on the slope of a neighboring mountain, Kolachakal. The place was far from the safest, an open slope, strong wind. But apparently they simply did not manage to descend lower before darkness. After that came silence. The group was supposed to get in touch on the 12th of February. Nothing came. The search began on the 20th of February. On the 26th, the tent was found, standing on an incline partially covered with snow. It had been cut from inside. Inside remained warm clothing, food, documents, footwear, an axe. Tracks led down toward the forest. Some were barefoot, some in socks, in the frost of -30 degrees. A few days later, bodies were found. The first 5 closer to the forest, 2 at the campfire, 3 on the way back to the tent. The remaining 4 were discovered only in May, under snow, in a ravine deeper in the forest. They were less clothed, but precisely they had the heaviest injuries. Dubinina had multiple rib fractures, soft tissue damage, her tongue missing. Zolotaryov had his rib cage destroyed. Thibaut Brignoles had a severe blow to the skull. Experts noted, such injuries are possible only under the impact of enormous force, but without visible external wounds, as if after an explosion or a fall from great height. On the clothing of Krivonischenko and Zolotaryov, traces of radiation were found. The level exceeded the natural background by 2 to 3 times. The source was not established. Later, this was linked with the fact that Krivonischenko had earlier worked at the atomic facility Chelyabinsk 40, but this was only a version. No radiation was found on anyone else. The investigation lasted 3 months. On the 28th of May, 1959, the case was closed. In the official conclusion, it was stated, "Death occurred as a result of the action of an irresistible force." Thus began the most famous and unexplained tragedy in Soviet history. When the investigators began analyzing the circumstances, it became clear this was not just an accident. Too many details did not fit into a logical picture. Let us start with the tent. It stood on an open slope, exposed to wind and icing. Yet only 1.5 kilometers below began a forest, a much more protected and obviously convenient place to camp. Why experienced hikers chose this spot remains a mystery to this day. The tracks leading away from the tent were fixed in deep snow. They went toward the forest, parallel, irregular, some clear, others intermittent. One track trailed separately from the rest. This gave grounds to assume that at the moment of evacuation, the group was disorganized or frightened. At the tree where the bodies of Krivonischenko and Doroshenko were found, thick branches were broken at a height of about 3 meters. This is confirmed by photographs and testimonies. It is believed that the hikers tried to climb the pine, perhaps to look around or to get dry branches, but in the conditions of night cold and loss of clothing, this looked like a desperate attempt to survive. The distribution of clothing among the participants also raised questions. On the dead were found fragments of things belonging to others. This allows one to assume that in the last minutes, the living tried to warm the dying. But why the heaviest injuries were with those who were less protected remains unclear. The bodies found in the spring in the ravine lay side by side, pressed to each other. One of the search participants, Yevgeny Maslenikov, later recalled, one of the dead was in a crawling position. This is not reflected in the official protocols, but is recorded in his personal notes. There, it was also mentioned that one of the hikers held a blank sheet of paper in his hand. This episode did not get into the official materials, but in interviews, the searchers spoke about it. The cuts on the tent are confirmed precisely. They were made from inside with a knife in several places. Expert analysis established this, but in the recollections of Mikhail Sharavin, one of the search participants, there is a claim that the tent seemed to have been stretched again, as if it was set up after the incident. This version did not enter the case materials, but was discussed by researchers. Among the belongings, a camera was found, officially not listed as belonging to the participants. It contained an overexposed film. One frame, later given the number 33, represented an image with intersecting streaks of light. There are many versions of what this was, from light leakage to an optical effect. None of the versions has received full confirmation. All these facts are real. Some of them are documented officially. Some are based on memories and reports of the searchers. Individually, they are hard to explain, but together, they create an atmosphere of the unexplainable, something that leaves not only questions, but also a feeling that beyond the case, there is something more than what is seen in the protocols. The investigation began on the 27th of February, 1959. Immediately after the discovery of the first bodies, it was led by the prosecutor of the Sverdlovsk region, Lev Ivanov. He had experience, but he faced such a case for the first time. By order from Moscow, the investigation was taken under special control. Already within a few days, representatives of the prosecutor's office, the KGB, and the military arrived at the site. Everything that happened was recorded, but far from everything was preserved. Autopsy protocols were kept with breaks and altered dates. The same act could appear in different parts of the case with different timestamps. In some documents, signatures were missing. Part of the evidence was later removed, and part of the materials remained closed until the 90s. Radiograms, which were supposed to be recorded daily, either disappeared or were marked as not subject to publication. Later, Ivanov admitted he was not allowed to finish the investigation according to his own scenario. When he began to study testimonies about strange light phenomena on the night of the tragedy, he was forbidden to do so. In 1990, he published an article where he wrote directly he had been pressured and he believed that the cause could have been something connected with military technologies or atmospheric phenomena. He was not allowed to verify it. The case was closed on the 28th of May, 1959. The result turned out blurred. Death occurred as a result of the action of an irresistible force, without specific causes, without mention of guilt or mistakes. From internal documents, it is visible that the decision was made quickly, without deep analysis. Not a single expert was called again. Protocols of repeated examinations of the bodies, which could have given more information, were not carried out. After the case was closed, the area was temporarily, although unofficially, closed to tourists. In the 90s, when the materials began to be declassified, researchers discovered in some places pages were missing. Folders were stitched, not in order. Numbers of documents did not match previous versions. All this shows that the case was edited, possibly for ideological reasons, possibly because of state secrecy. When the official investigation did not give a clear answer, many versions appeared. Some were fantastic, others rested on facts, even if incomplete. One of the most persistent hypotheses is the testing of weapons. In February 1959, in the region of the Northern Urals, secret military experiments really could have been conducted. Several coincidences point to this. First, in the region of Ivdel, and the settlement of Vijay rocket flights of 12 were recorded. Second, in the same month, eyewitnesses observed bright light phenomena in the sky, similar to flashes. They described them as fireballs moving at enormous speed. In documents declassified in the 90s, there are data about the testing of parachute mines, munitions which do not leave craters but create a strong shock wave. Such a wave could have caused injuries like those received by Dubinina and Zolotaryov, internal damage without external wounds. In favor of this version speaks also the behavior of the group. If they heard or saw something threatening, they could have left the tent in haste without putting on clothes. Another version is infrasound. This is a physical phenomenon where certain frequencies cause in a person anxiety, disorientation, and panic. Researchers put forward the hypothesis. The combination of the relief of Mount Kolachakal and strong wind could have caused an infrasound resonance. People, seized by sudden fear, could have run out of the shelter not understanding what was happening. But even if this explanation is correct, it does not give an answer to the main question. Where did the heavy injuries come from, and why were the bodies found not so quickly? Yet another version is hidden witnesses. According to one of the versions, the tourists could have come across people or an object that was not supposed to be seen. Perhaps it was a military group, perhaps experimental equipment. This explains the interference in the case materials, the disappearance of protocols, and the changes in records. However, as in many similar versions, there is no direct evidence here, only indirect signs. There are also other hypotheses connected with a system error. For example, the bodies could have been found earlier than stated officially and temporarily taken away for expertise or internal checking. This explains inconsistencies in dates, confusion in protocols, and the strange placement of the bodies. Such a version does not claim that the tourists were killed, but it shows the official investigation could have hidden not the cause, but the circumstances of the tragedy. It is important to remember, none of these versions is officially recognized, but each of them was born not from fantasies, but from attempts to explain real facts. For when the official version, the action of an irresistible force, explains nothing, precisely such hypotheses become a tool of search. Today, more than 60 years after the tragedy, interest in the Dyatlov case does not fade. The reason is simple. With an enormous volume of information, the case still has no internal logic. And although many documents have been declassified, new data have not removed the questions, but on the contrary, have added them. In the 2000s, a new wave of research began. Private individuals, journalists, and independent groups conducted dozens of expeditions to the pass. Weather conditions, slope relief, the physics of avalanches, the state of the tent were studied. One of the expeditions showed the incline on which the tent stood is too gentle for a classical avalanche. Snow could slide down, but its volume would have been insufficient to inflict such serious injuries. This contradicts the official version of the investigative committee published in 2020. According to this conclusion, the tourists died because of the descent of a snow slab, a small layer of snow that slid under its own weight. This version explains the flight from the tent, but not the nature of the injuries. Not one participant received damage typical for avalanches, neither suffocation, nor fractures of limbs, nor rupture of lungs. Moreover, the tent remained in place, was not torn apart or buried. This means the impact was partial and uneven. A reconstruction of the group's route was also carried out. From diaries and photographs, it was possible to restore the path almost by days. They moved strictly according to the schedule and did not deviate from the plan. This excludes the version that they accidentally ended up in a closed or forbidden zone. They were following an approved route, and no one could have imagined that it would become the last. As for the documents, from the 2010s, part of them was published. But the key sections connected with radio communications, internal orders, and actions of military groups are still either missing or remain closed. Some protocols, both autopsy acts and documents about the discovery of the bodies, differ from one another. This was established by researchers comparing copies of different years. Such discrepancies are hardly accidental. In the last decades, digital modeling tools have also appeared, taking into account data on wind, snow, and temperature. But even they did not give an unambiguous answer. For example, modeling showed if the tourists had left the tent because of the threat of an avalanche, most likely they would have stayed together and returned as soon as it became safe. But in reality, they left and did not come back. This means there was something that prevented them. What exactly, we still do not know. The story of the Dyatlov Pass remains one of the most mysterious in the world. And now, let us move from the cold mountains to the sea. There, among waves and mist, for several centuries, another strange image has lived. A ship that should not exist. It is called the Flying Dutchman. And the more about it is told, the less is clear. What in this legend is invention, and what is experienced fear? The tradition of the Flying Dutchman appeared already in the 15th century, in the times when European states fought for trade routes, laid courses to India and Africa, and lost ships in stormy waters every day. The very expression, Flying Dutchman, first appears in English-language sources in the 17th century, but the story itself is much older. The name refers to Dutch seafarers, among the most experienced and at the same time the most superstitious sailors of their era. In the 15th century, Holland was a maritime power with a strong fleet and active trade. Through them, researchers believe, the image entered the English tradition and from there spread throughout the world. The first tales of a strange ship that appears suddenly, sails against the wind, and disappears in the fog began to be recorded by sailors passing the Cape of Good Hope. Since ancient times, this cape was considered the boundary between oceans and was one of the most difficult and dangerous parts of the route from Europe to India. It was there that the Flying Dutchman was most often seen. Judging by the notes, the sailors did not consider it fiction. They mentioned it as a harbinger of misfortune. To see the Flying Dutchman meant to expect a storm, a breakdown, illness, or even death in the crew. He does not attack, does not fire, he simply passes by with sails filled with a wind that in fact does not exist. Some researchers link the origin of the legend with the image of a captain who broke divine or maritime laws. Some think it was a curse for murder, some for a blasphemous oath. But in the first tales, the captain's name was not mentioned. It appeared later when the story acquired literary form. The most famous version of the legend took shape closer to the 16th century. At its center is a captain named Van der Deen, a Dutchman sailing on a merchant ship from the East Indies to Europe. At the Cape of Good Hope, a storm caught up with him. The wind broke masts, waves struck the deck. The crew begged the captain to turn back, but he refused. According to the legend, he then exclaimed, "I will round this cape, even if I am fated to sail forever." This phrase became his sentence. The sea does not forgive daring. The storm did not subside, and the ship disappeared. Since then, it has seemed stuck between worlds and continues to sail the waves, approaching no shore. It is doomed to sail forever. And so is its crew. According to the myth, sometimes the Flying Dutchman tries to hand letters to the living. Sailors allegedly saw a boat lowered from the side with a dead rower. Those who took the letter soon died. Sometimes it was seen from afar, an old ship with worn sails, sometimes glowing, almost always in a storm, on the eve of disaster. Where this story came from is not known for sure. Some believe the image of Van der Deen is inspired by a real captain who perished at the Cape in the 15th century. In other versions, the captain is not Dutch at all, but English, Scottish, or even Spanish. But precisely the nickname Dutchman stuck, perhaps because in that era, sailors from Holland were famous for stubbornness and courage bordering on madness. If one leaves myths and turns to history, it turns out that mentions of the Flying Dutchman were found not only in campfire retellings, but also in official ship logs. The earliest written evidence dates to 1796. British sailors passing the southern Atlantic noted in the log, "In the night fog, they saw a ship sailing against the wind. It disappeared suddenly without a sound." The most famous case happened in 1881, when the Flying Dutchman was allegedly seen by officers of the British Navy, including the future King George V, then still a prince. According to the report, at dawn, one of the sailors noticed a phantom ship in a crimson light and soon died in an accident. This entry has been preserved in the log of the ship Bocantia. There were more than a dozen similar messages. Almost all of them came from south of the Cape of Good Hope, from the southern Atlantic or the coast of Australia. The character of the descriptions is strikingly similar. An old sailing ship, strange radiance, movement against the wind, and a disturbing feeling among witnesses. Scientists tried to explain the phenomenon. The most widespread version is a mirage known as Fata Morgana. Under special conditions, air over water can create a distorted reflection of objects beyond the horizon. This gives the illusion of a hovering or semi-transparent vessel. Another hypothesis is atmospheric refraction, when warm air lies above cold and light is bent in a special way. This too can create the image of a ship hanging in the air, but both mirages and refraction are too rare to occur with such frequency precisely at this cape. Besides, not all observations took place at night. Some officers claimed they saw the ship in daylight, in clear weather and with good visibility. What it really was, a physical phenomenon, a collective hallucination, or something else, is unknown. But it is worth remembering. Sailors were observant people. They knew how to read the sky, watch the wind, and keep accurate records. Of course, superstition abounded at sea, but that does not mean every mention of the Flying Dutchman is merely a product of imagination. Perhaps something real did stand behind these stories. We simply still do not know what exactly. Even if the ghost ship never existed, the image of the Flying Dutchman turned out to be so resilient that it demands explanation. Why did sailors continue to believe in it even after scientific hypotheses appeared? Why did the legend repeat again and again and the fear not disappear? Some researchers believe it was a collective way to cope with the unknown. For in the 17th and 18th centuries, the sea remained a territory of constant risk. Navigation was inaccurate, weather unpredictable, help non-existent. Every voyage could become the last. In these conditions, superstitions not only maintained order on board, but also gave meaning to what would otherwise be perceived as chaos. To see a ghost ship meant it was not just a storm, but a sign. It meant one could prepare. There is another point of view. The Flying Dutchman is a symbol of guilt, a ship that cannot return, a captain who broke an oath, a crew that found no peace. Such an image appears not only in maritime tradition. In Japan, they tell of boats with the dead emerging from the fog. In Norway, of ships without a captain carried by the wind. In China, of the souls of the drowned seeking a guide. All these stories are linked to the anxiety felt when the body of the dead does not return to shore. Some philosophers see in this an archetype, the eternal wanderer who has lost his path but not his goal. He seems not to know he has perished and continues to sail by inertia. This makes the Flying Dutchman not so much frightening as sad. He is neither evil nor dangerous. He is simply stuck. Thus, behind the sea legend lies not only fear of the storm, it is a story of how a person loses the path and how the memory of it remains in culture. Over time, the Flying Dutchman ceased to be just a maritime tale. He entered literature, theater, and music, and became a symbol, understood even by those who have never been at sea. In the 19th century, the story gained new life in art. One of the first to bring the ghost ship to the stage was the German composer Richard Wagner. His opera, The Flying Dutchman, written in 1843, presented a new hero, not a sinister ghost, but a man doomed to eternal wandering and awaiting release through love. This was no longer a scare story, but a romantic drama. The opera quickly became popular, and from that moment, the image of the Flying Dutchman acquired a double nature. On the one hand, a maritime legend, on the other, a figure of tragic solitude. After Wagner, the theme appeared in literature. In the 19th century, it was taken up by Heinrich Heine, Walter Scott, Washington Irving. In different versions, the ship arises in a storm, sends signals, seeks help, or tries to rid itself of a curse. But the essence remains the same. It cannot stop. It sails not by its own will, but by necessity. By the beginning of the 20th century, the Flying Dutchman had become a stable image in mass consciousness. He was known not only to sailors and readers, but also to artists, poets, and directors. In the 20th and 21st centuries, he appears in cinema, animation, comics, and games, from serious interpretations to parodies. But he always remains a symbol of what exists, yet does not belong to the world of the living. For example, in the films about Pirates of the Caribbean, the Flying Dutchman turns into a ship of death, controlling the souls of dead sailors. In other versions, it becomes a laboratory, a base of aliens, or a metaphor for an inner crisis. But everywhere it remains isolated. It is on a journey, yet outside time. This is what makes it universal. Why does this legend adapt so easily? Because it touches a common human fear: to remain between life and death, between home and the road, between beginning and end. We do not know what exactly the sailors saw at the Cape of Good Hope, but we know for sure what they felt. It is precisely this feeling of loneliness, aimless movement, and impossibility of return that made the Flying Dutchman an eternal image. The next story is not about a ship that vanished, but about people who vanished from a ship. The vessel remained on the waves, empty, intact, as if waiting for them to return, but never did. This was the Mary Celeste, a ship of mystery. Its story began even before it received that name. The vessel was built in 1861 in Nova Scotia, Canada, and named Amazon. From the very beginning, the ship was unlucky. The first captain died a few days after setting out on a voyage. On the very first sailing, the vessel suffered serious damage. During the following years, Amazon changed several owners, ran aground more than once, collided with other vessels, and in 1867, it was sold to Americans. The new owner completely refitted the ship and gave it a new name, Mary Celeste. It was a two-masted brig, about 31 meters long, designed to carry cargo on transatlantic routes. Under the American flag, it made several successful voyages, but its reputation remained doubtful. Sailors said the vessel behaved unstably, although technically everything was in order. Gradually, the rumor took hold: Mary Celeste brings misfortune. For Captain Benjamin Briggs, this was a new stage. An experienced seafarer, respected in Boston and New York, he, in 1872, agreed to command the vessel. The ship was well equipped, had received new cargo, and nothing foretold trouble. On the 7th of November, 1872, Mary Celeste left the port of Staten Island, New York State, bound for Genoa. On board, there was a cargo of about 1,700 barrels of denatured alcohol intended for industrial use. The captain of the vessel was Benjamin Briggs. Along with him on the voyage went his wife Sarah and 2-year-old daughter Sophia. Besides them on board were 7 crew members, whom the captain personally selected, relying on the experience of past sailings. The weather on the day of departure was clear, the sea calm. The vessel left the harbor in good technical condition, supplied with provisions, drinking water, and everything necessary for a transatlantic crossing. For several weeks, Mary Celeste sailed east, crossing the Atlantic. She never reached the port of destination. On the 4th of December, almost 1 month after putting to sea, the ship was found drifting without crew near the Azores. She was under sail, without obvious damage, but there was not a single person on board. On the 4th of December, 1872, the brigantine De Gratia was crossing the Atlantic, approaching the Azores. Around noon, a watch sailor noticed a vessel moving on an unsteady course. Captain David Morehouse ordered to draw closer. He immediately recognized the name on the stern, Mary Celeste. This was surprising. He knew her captain Benjamin Briggs personally. They had spoken before departure in New York, and Mary Celeste was supposed to be far ahead. But the vessel did not respond. No signal flags, no flashes, nothing. This looked strange, considering that the sails were partly set. After several unsuccessful attempts to get an answer, Morehouse sent a boarding party. The sailors went aboard and immediately realized the vessel was empty. No captain, no family, no crew. Yet the state of the ship was not catastrophic. In the hold, they found about 1 meter of seawater. For an old wooden vessel, this was considered acceptable. The sails were partly damaged, one bulwark torn off, hatches ajar, pumps working. The ship's log in the captain's cabin had entries up to the 25th of November. The entry was routine, without alarming signs. The vessel was passing the island of Santa Maria. Personal belongings remained in place: clothing, luggage, instruments, and provisions. Food and water were sufficient for at least 1 month. However, the chronometer, sextant, navigation tables, and the only boat were missing. They were probably taken along during evacuation. There were no signs of struggle, panic, or storm. Everything looked as if the crew had left the ship voluntarily, but left no explanation. The vessel was capable of continuing the voyage, so Captain Morehouse ordered it taken to Gibraltar for official investigation. After the arrival of Mary Celeste in Gibraltar on the 12th of December 1872, an official inquiry began. Inspection confirmed that the ship could continue sailing. Of the cargo of 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol, 9 were damaged, but there were no signs of interference. On board remained the crew's personal effects, including clothes and documents. The captain's log contained the last entry of the 25th of November, made near the Azores. Provisions and fresh water were sufficient. Again, it was noted that the sextant, chronometer, navigation tables, wheel journal, and the only boat were missing. All this pointed to an organized evacuation. The commission could not establish the exact reason for the disappearance of the crew. The reports recorded no signs of violence, conflict, or attack. Among the versions considered were a pirate raid, a mutiny on board, deliberate abandonment for insurance fraud. Unofficial hypotheses were also discussed: the effect of alcohol fumes, sudden panic, or a natural phenomenon. But none of the versions was confirmed. In the end, the documents stated, the vessel was abandoned for an unknown reason, not related to violence or wreck. The hearings on the case of Mary Celeste took place in the Admiralty Court of Gibraltar from December 1872 and continued until February of the following year. Presiding over the commission was the Crown's advocate, Fred Solly Flood. The main questions were the legality of the De Gratia crew's claim for salvage reward and clarification of the circumstances of the disappearance of the Mary Celeste crew. The testimony of Captain Morehouse and his team was found consistent. However, Solly Flood expressed suspicions of possible collusion, though there was no evidence. During the proceedings, it was confirmed. No damage characteristic of an attack was found. Property remained. The court recognized the right to reward, but the sum was greatly reduced. Instead of the expected share of the cargo's value, the De Gratia crew received only about 1/6, £3,000 sterling instead of 15,000. The disappearance of Captain Briggs, his family, and the entire crew was recorded as unexplained. Thus, the legal part of the case was concluded. Music. The next story is no less disturbing. This time, the mystery is connected not with the sea, but with the land. It was not an expedition or a detachment that vanished, but an entire colony. People with families, tools, hopes for the future. They built houses, sowed fields, and disappeared. No bodies, no notes, no witnesses remained. Only one carved word: Roanoke. The end of the 15th century. Europe enters the age of great geographical discoveries. England, watching the successes of Spain and Portugal, seeks to secure a foothold in the New World. In 1584, Sir Walter Raleigh receives a patent from Queen Elizabeth to found a colony in North America. The first expeditions land on the coast of present-day North Carolina, on Roanoke Island in Pamlico Sound. But these were only reconnaissance groups. A permanent settlement is founded in the summer of 1587. The expedition is led by John White, an experienced cartographer and traveler. With him go more than 100 people, men, women, and children. Among them, his daughter Eleanor and her husband Ananias Dare. Here is born Virginia Dare, the first child of English descent to be born in the New World. The settlement received the name City of Raleigh, but more often it was still called Roanoke. At first, everything went smoothly. Houses were built, land cultivated, reliance placed on help from England. But soon, they faced shortages of resources, tension with local tribes, and uncertainty about the future. Against this background, Governor White decides to return to England for provisions, weapons, and new instructions. The plan was simple: to return by spring. But England was preparing for war. The threat of a Spanish invasion led to mobilization of the fleet. In the summer of 1588, the campaign of the Invincible Armada began. All ships were requisitioned for defense needs. John White tried to sail, but his vessels either refused or were sent on other missions. Only after 3 years, in 1590, did he manage to return. The expedition reached Roanoke, but what they saw shocked everyone. The settlement had vanished. Houses dismantled, fences removed, no traces of fire or battle. Everything looked as if the people had left consciously. No boats, no bodies, no notes were found. Only the word Croatoan carved on a tree. A storm prevented White from checking the neighboring island where the colonists might have moved. He could not return again. Thus ended his personal story, and began one of the greatest mysteries of the British colonial era. White could not know how long ago this carving had been left, and whether those who created it were still alive. He was going to set out for Croatoan, but never managed to. There was almost no food and water left on the ship. A storm was raging, and the crew refused to take the risk. This was the last attempt to learn anything. Neither he nor anyone from his time ever reached the neighboring island to check this guess. Sometime later, White returned to England and never again went on new expeditions. More than 400 years have passed since the disappearance of the colony, and all this time, the question of what happened to the people of Roanoke has remained unanswered. For many centuries, attempts to learn their fate were made only from time to time, and only in the 20th century did real scientific research begin. Historians were most interested in two directions: Roanoke Island itself, where the settlement vanished, and Hatteras Island, the very Croatoan, where, according to White's assumption, the colonists might have moved. In the first half of the 20th century, archaeologists began excavations on both islands. At the supposed settlement site on Roanoke, they found remains of fortifications, charred boards, fragments of pottery. All this belonged to the 15th century. But no traces of tragedy or violent disappearance were discovered. No battles, no mass death, no destruction. Nothing that would explain the disappearance of an entire group of people. More curious finds awaited researchers in the south, on Hatteras Island. In 1990 and in the 2000th year, they discovered artifacts there that are believed to have belonged either to the colonists or to those who came into contact with them. Among the finds were a ring from the era of Elizabeth I, iron tools, European ceramics. Some objects were buried at a depth corresponding to the period of the end of the 15th century. Archaeologists from the First Colony Foundation proposed the idea that at least part of the group really moved to the Croatoan tribe and was accepted into their community. This would explain the absence of traces of violence. There was no conflict, no struggle. They simply left. However, the archaeological evidence remains indirect. These things could have arrived there later, through trade, exchange, or by chance. The scientific consensus today is cautious. There is not enough proof that it was the vanished colony that lived on Hatteras, but this line of research is considered the most promising. The disappearance of the Roanoke colony has generated dozens of versions. Some were rational, others mystical, and some balanced on the edge of fact and fantasy. Already in the 15th century, among settlers inhabiting the coasts of Virginia and Carolina, there were rumors that deep in the interior lived Indians with gray eyes and fair skin. These stories formed the basis for assumptions that the colonists were taken into tribes and over time assimilated. Some anthropologists even looked among the descendants of local peoples for genetic or cultural traces of English presence, in language, in the architecture of dwellings, in everyday life. But convincing evidence has not been found. There was also a version of forced evacuation. The settlement might have suffered from lack of fresh water, crop failure, or disease. Left without contact with England, the colony might not have withstood environmental pressure and left Roanoke. There is little confirmation of this version too, but it explains the absence of traces of struggle or destruction. Less likely, but still mentioned in documents, is the version of an attack. Some historians believed that the Secatan tribe could have attacked the colony. However, archaeological data do not confirm this. No bones, no weapons, no traces of violence. Even the tribes with which the English later communicated did not speak of killings. At most, they mentioned that whites might have lived among them, and in mass consciousness over time, there appeared completely fantastic versions. The lost colony was written about as an object of a curse. They spoke of ritual sacrifices, ghost ships, of time itself swallowing the settlement. These stories inspired writers, cinema, and television. Today, researchers lean toward the most cautious conclusion. Part of the colonists really could have assimilated with neighboring tribes, perhaps on Hatteras Island or in the interior. The rest might have died of disease or tried to move but did not survive. Because of the absence of inscriptions, remains, and written sources, no version can be considered final. That is why the story of Roanoke remains not just an episode of early colonization, but a true mystery. A mystery based on facts, documents, and the fates of real people, still debated to this day.